What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today we're going to be working on a 2008 Mini Cooper S R56. Today on the Mini behind us, we're going to be covering how to replace your valve cover gasket and or your whole valve cover assembly. In front of us today we have an L-ring valve cover, which includes the valve cover, the gasket, and these have a built-in PCV system, which is also another reason why you may want to consider replacing these. As the vehicles age and the mileage get a little bit higher, the diaphragm inside can tend to fail, causing you some problems in the crankcase. And if you let that go for too long, you're going to overpressurize the system and start blowing out seals. So definitely something you want to avoid. Aside from the PCV, another thing you may want to consider, or another reason why you may want to replace your valve cover, is depending on the kind of driving you do, Ben Morawski, your valve cover is sitting super close to the turbo. Over time, if that turbo gets pretty hot, you can actually start to melt the valve cover. Ask me how I know, I've seen it in person. So just one more thing to keep in mind, if you're doing a lot of hot, heavy driving in the Mini, it can get hot enough to the point where it starts to melt the valve cover, in which case a gasket is not going to do the trick, and you're going to want to consider replacing the whole assembly. This DIY is going to cover both how to do just the gasket or the whole valve cover assembly, as it's going to be pretty much the same steps. But before we get started on that, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need to do this DIY. For this job, my good people, we're going to be using an 8mm and a 10mm socket, accompanied by your favorite 1/4 inch or 3/8 drive ratchet, as well as a torque wrench. I'm also going to be using a 6-inch extension, a small pick, a magnet tool, and some ultra black RTV. We also have an electric ratchet to speed up the removal and install of our hardware, some brake clean, especially if you're going to be reusing your valve cover to really clean up the channels where the gaskets are going to go, and some shop towels just to wipe everything down. Now with that, let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. All right, my good people, we are under the hood of the R56. It's important to note you want to do this on a nice, cool engine. You definitely don't want to mess with this when it's hot, as you risk burning yourself and or damaging the car. First things first is we're going to work on removing the wiring harness that's above here. So we're going to start by removing our ignition coils and the harness. To undo the coils, these are pretty standard. Most of you have seen these by now. You lift up on the connector or on the housing of the clip here. As you lift this up, it's going to push back the connector. Oftentimes, depending on the car, these can be a little bit weak, so it doesn't hurt to pinch the sides and lift up just to keep these from popping off of the ignition coil. Then from there, we can lift up the coil and just set it to the side. If you take a close look in here, you can see how much gunk and debris is actually all over the valve cover. Some of that can be due to just poor judgment when filling the thing with oil, but a lot of it can also be just due to a failing PCV system inside the actual valve cover. So definitely due for a replacement. So we're going to pop all these ignition coils out first. Now we have the coils off. We're going to grab our 8mm socket, and we're going to remove the ground nut here that goes to the ignition coil harness. We're just going to hang on to that nut and set it off to the side. Now some of you may have the beauty cover that sits on top of here. Go ahead and remove that if you haven't done so already, obviously, so you can get the rest of this harness off. Now, if you take a look here in my left hand, you'll see this little metal style alligator clip. Those usually bite onto the edge here of the valve cover, and you'll have 2 or 3 that help hold this harness in place. This little girl's a little bit worse for wear, so she's not going to have that. But if it did, you'd want to go ahead and undo those so you can pull your harness off to the side. Our connector for our O2 sensor is also paired to this harness, which is also something that would typically be held in around here on the valve cover in a car that's in a little bit better shape. So in our case, it's already out. We're going to have to zip tie this. You can see it's chafing the wire from wherever it's been hanging. But for now, we'll just go ahead and tuck it over to the side. While I have you here on the driver's side of things, we have our elbow that goes into the PCV coming off of the intake boot. There's a little bridge clip that looks like a bridge that sits over the top of it that holds this down, with a little ear on either side that you can push in and then pop the clip up so we can undo this hose. So let's do that now. So we're just going to go ahead on the front half, push in on that a little bit as we pry up with the flathead screwdriver. There we go. Once you get one side kind of started, then the other side will come out as well. If not, you can go in with your pick or screwdriver. But here you can see the little hooks, and that's what's holding this little clip in. Once we have that out, we can go ahead and pull this hose off. And then right by this hose, we have our cam position sensor, which is held in by an 8mm bolt. We also have an O-ring, which we had on the table earlier, which we have linked down below for you, to replace this O-ring on the sensor itself so that it has a nice fresh seal. We're going to take our 8mm and just undo that bolt. All right, so with that, here is our old cam sensor, which we're going to be reusing, but the O-ring is what we're going to be replacing. This one's pretty flat, so it's definitely a good time to do this. That way your valve cover or your valve cover gasket and your O-ring here is all nice and fresh. Small pick or flathead, just to get that old O-ring out. We're just cleaning out the channel in which that sits in. And then we can take our new O-ring, feed that over the top. And then because it's a bit of a tight fit, we can use the same pick or little flathead screwdriver to just get it started, just like so. Now this is good to rock and roll. We're going to set it to the side and we'll come back to it when we install it. Back over at the valve cover, we have another PCV line right up here on the passenger top side. This is one of those pinch style ones, just like you see on typical BMWs. There's a ridged area that we're going to be pinching from on either side. So we'll try the pinching thing first, and if that doesn't work, then we'll add a little bit of help from the flathead. But as you can see, that came out nicely, no problem, and it looks like it's been leaking for a little while. O-ring though looks to be in good shape. I think this hose was replaced at some point, so we're not too worried about that. I'm just going to go ahead and tuck it back out of our way for now. All right, my good people, with that, all that we have left to do is remove a bunch of 10mm hardware all around the valve cover. So we have a total of 13 10mm bolts to remove. So let's go ahead and zap those out. We're going to use the electric ratchet and a 10mm socket. There is a pattern that you're supposed to follow for the removal and install of the valve cover. So we're going to go ahead and follow that now, starting with 1, which is going to be the middle here. For a bolt that's covered in so much oil and grime, the head of it was very rusty. All right, and with that freed up, we should be able to lift this valve cover up now. And here she is, my good people. So pretty standard. If you were going to be reusing this valve cover, you'd want to obviously take your old gasket out using something like this, like a small pick or a flathead screwdriver. But the important thing is cleaning these channels and making sure there's no oil or any residue left in them before you install your new gasket. Use some brake cleaner nice and tight up close and just get this all nice and clean. Fold over a shop towel, use the edges, and you should be fine. We're going to show you where to apply the RTV before we install the new one. But before we get to that point, we're going to go ahead and set this to the side and work on cleaning up our cylinder head. So let's do that now. Come off. Don't forget to pull off the sealing gaskets for the spark plug tubes. Ours stayed behind. Not a problem. We're just going to go ahead and get them off. And now we're just going to take some shop towel and clean off the excess first. Get most of the oil wiped off. If you have any weird grime or buildup on the sides of the head, just wipe them away from the cams, not towards the cams. In this case, we're in pretty decent shape here, just regular oil, nothing too grimy or dirty. Now, in these corners by the high pressure fuel pump and the vacuum pump, we're going to be using a little bit of RTV. If there's any residual left behind from maybe a prior valve cover gasket job, make sure you clean all that out. Clean that up to your best of your ability. Someone's gone in here with a flathead screwdriver in the past. There's a lot of gouge marks from a prior cleanup, if I had to guess. You can usually use some solvents to get that off. Maybe a plastic razor blade if you have a lot of heavy buildup, but don't go in there with a metal screwdriver. All right, with that preliminary wipe, now I'm gonna go down and hit it with some brake clean on the shop towel, just to really clean the surface up. All right, and now with that, my good people, our surface is nice and prepped. We can grab our black or ultra black Permatex RTV and prep the sealing joints, as Mini calls them, and that's going to be the two corners by the vacuum pump and the high pressure fuel pump, and the area around here where the center of the gasket meets for the two sealing surfaces on the spark plug tubes. So let me grab that now and we'll get that applied. So we're going to take our RTB. I find it easier to just put it on your finger. Just place it in the corner that you need it. For those of you following along with a new valve cover, L-Ring does supply 2 different style plugs. For the back here, which should be plugged up, we have the small black one or the red one. Sometimes the red ones come installed. We're going to go ahead and install this black plug. All right, we have our plug in. And we're going to go ahead, again, gaskets are on. If you're reusing your valve cover, make sure all these channels are nice and clean. The gasket only goes on one way, and it usually is thick enough to just press on and hold itself onto the valve cover. The main thing you want to check for when you put the valve cover back on is to make sure that the gasket hasn't fallen off or rolled over or gotten pinched while you're installing it. Now we're going to feed our valve cover on. Boom, baby. Now with that, we're going to install our hardware. We're going to get it all just fed in by hand first and maybe a little bit snugged up. But otherwise, we're going to tighten this down in a specific fashion, which is going to be the same way we removed it. So we'll walk you through each bolt one by one. So let's do that now. All right, my good people, we're going to start feeding our hardware in, starting with the 2 longest ones because they were easy to remember. And they're the only ones that are really different. The 10 mil with the built-in stud for our ground. That one always goes right here in the center. So that one's also very easy to remember. All right, these at this point are all started by hand. So I'm just gonna use the electric ratchet just to speed things up a little bit and snug them up. And now we're just gonna go around with the torque wrench and do the exact same thing, but bringing them to 10 Newton meters each. All right, with the valve cover torqued down, we can reinstall our cam position sensor once more, just so that there's no more open holes. Again, new O-ring, just pop that baby in. If you need to, lube up the O-ring a little bit if it's brand new with a little bit of oil. I'm gonna go ahead and do that now, and then we'll feed it in. Since this is all nice and new, it's a little bit dry. All right, now we can take our 8 mil bolt, feed that baby back in there by hand. And this one's a tiny hardware, but if you wanted to torque it, no more than 8 to 10 Newton meters. For us today, we're just gonna snug it up, and it's good. Don't forget to plug it back in, my good people. Connector should be just hanging off to the side. While I have you there, we can also reinstall our PCB hose. And then don't forget the little clip, the little bridge that locks it into place. PCB line on the other side. There we go. Our mass airflow sensor has 2 little clips on it, which were not done on the old valve cover, and these go into the valve cover themselves to keep the harness basically out of harm's way. So we're gonna go ahead and reinstall those. They're like alligator clips, just like the front ignition coil harness has. They just kind of go in like so. There we go, that's proper now. Now we can go ahead, and what I'm gonna do first is pop in the ignition coils so that we have those ready to rock before we swing over the harness. I'm gonna feed these babies in. Make sure they seal nicely around the valve cover all the way down. Now we're gonna swing over our ignition coil harness and plug these babies in. We're gonna bring the latch down as they go in, which is gonna help lock them down. These little rubber grommets kind of just key into the valve cover. They're really more helpful if you have the little beauty cover that sits over them. Otherwise, they're just gonna kind of dance around. But it doesn't hurt to tuck them in for now. Alligator clip back on the side of the valve cover there. Again, typically you have some here. If not, the beauty cover does a lot of the work. Don't forget your ground strap and your 8mm nut. Similar to the cam position sensor, we're just gonna go ahead and snug this up very gently. We don't wanna over torque the 10mm bolts underneath it. This valve cover changed the whole look of this engine. And then we're gonna go ahead and tuck our mass airflow sensor wiring back over. Now this one's a little bit worse for wear. Where it used to live is no longer a thing. So we're gonna do our best to route it out of the heat shield. We're gonna use a little zip tie over here to get that out of the way. And we'll go ahead and button that up much nicer. But what's going on, my good people, that is going to conclude this DIY for today. Overall, a really easy and straightforward job on the R56. It's going to be a similar process on the N12 engine, with some of the vacuum lines looking a little bit different, but otherwise the same general idea. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave those in the comment section below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.